Hello and welcome to Pitt Street Research. My name is Stuart Roberts and I'm one of the founders of our firm. And joining me from Melbourne on the morning of Tuesday, the 14th of November 2023 is Mr. Steve Yatomi-Clarke, who's the CEO of Prescient Therapeutics, ASX PTX. Steve, good morning.
Good morning. Everything you said is correct.
Let me tell you what else is correct. We were talking about before we press the button. You've achieved a lot in the course of the last 12 months. You're about to have your annual general meeting. Probably the biggest achievement of all is getting some, albeit phase 1 data, showing that your PTX100 lead compound is a very effective new treatment solution for T Cell lymphomas.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, 12 months ago, we had some very provisional data. Mind you, we have to keep in mind, it's a safety study where we're looking to explore how the drug interacts in the body. It's called PK and PD, as you know. What we weren't expecting were the responses. So 12 months ago, we've got like a little hint. We had 2 patients that surprised us with partial responses where the tumour shrinks somewhat.
Right.
And they appeared to, look, it was tracking okay. It looked too early to tell, but here we are 12 months later with an expanded cohort there in this disease. And we've got enough data to think that this is looking like more than just a little blip in research where we've got many responses now. In fact, as we sit here today, it's 4 out of the 10, and the duration of those responses is very robust. Now, in a safety study, you don't normally expect to see that. So we are on the cusp of some very good things with that drug and could really see us in the pointy to clinical trials much, much, much sooner than would otherwise be possible.
The origin of PTX100, it's a drug that was first developed at Yale University. And the great bio-entrepreneur Paul Hopper, who put Prescient together in its present form, sourced that drug from Yale. It was basically a concept originally. The idea was to knock down an enzyme called GGT1 and then see where it goes. Talk to us about where you've taken it since it came into Prescient's lab all those years ago.
Yeah, it sat on the shelf for a long time. I mean, when I took the reins at Prescient, there was just no money to develop it. There was some drug product that was very, very old. By the time there was enough money in the company, it was a bit of a turnaround, it's fair to say. The drug had expired, and it's a very expensive drug to make for a small molecule. So there was, it actually, we would have liked to have entered in the clinic a lot sooner, but you can only do what you can do. So building on a previous clinical study before we got our hands on it in gastrointestinal tumours, which showed safety, and an enormous body of preclinical work across many malignancies, we decided we would put it into a basket study where we saw this, the pathway that this is active in, and thought, let's cast a net over these types of malignancies. One thing that was never explored with the drug preclinically or otherwise was a certain type of blood cancers called T Cell Lymphomas. And it was a chance meeting. It wasn't a chance meeting, but it was a meeting with the head of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, their CSO, a few years ago when we were discussing this, and he said, wow, do you realize that the pathway that you inhibit happens to, we've just discovered that it's really important in these types of lymphomas. He said this was hot off the press. He couldn't believe it. And so when we did this, when we initiated this study, we'll throw a blanket over a few solid tumours that are interested in a related pathway called RAS and this other pathway called RO that are important for T cell lymphomas. And that's where we took it. And we didn't know what we would see. It was a safety study, but what we didn't expect to see was well, firstly, the excellent safety, but this sweet spot of activity. So the thesis looks to be lining up quite nicely, where, years ago now, this meeting with this guy from the Lymphoma Society predicted that this pathway would be very, very important. Now, we've still got to do all of the correlative work, but what we don't need to do the work on is to realize that there's people walking around now on our study who have no business walking around, which is wonderful.
Right. So work hard and then have a bit of luck, basically, in terms of someone else working out your mechanism of action for you.
Well, let's not pretend that biotech isn't fraught with luck, good and bad.
I've seen a lot of that.
We're in the business of finding out things that have never been asked.
Absolutely. And it has always been so. So here we are in 2023, and what I'm really excited about is PFS in the latest batch of patients that you reported in March of about 9 months. Physician's choice in one of the studies I looked at might get about 3 on PFS with whatever the standard of care is for peripheral T Cell lymphoma or cutaneous. So suddenly you've got a big jump in terms of what's possible. And as you noted before, the objective response rate of 40%. And that was basically following up those original clues from the all-comer study that you did a while ago. What's exciting now is you've started to talk publicly, and admittedly it's early days, about the potential for this drug to go live after an upcoming phase 2 study. Talk to us about your reasoning there.
Well, it's incredible. So the normal, as your audience may or may not know, the typical path for drug development is, once you do an enormous body of preclinical research and you hit the clinic, phase 1 is it's safe. A larger phase 2 study, does it look to be working? And then if it looks to be working, goes to an even larger, longer phase 3 study. How well does it work? Is that signal real? And is it better than what's out there? And that's the big definitive study that at the end of that, if you reach your endpoint, the FDA or any regulatory body will give you a green light, if you'd like, to market the drug. In these rare diseases, it is often possible, I'll get back to this in a minute, it's often possible to bypass that phase 3 and actually do a smaller phase 2 of, let's call it 100 to 150 odd patients. And that is your registration study. That is your phase 3 equivalent, if you will, because it's a rare disease and there's not much out there. It's a disease of unmet need. So they're wanting to expedite the getting new effective drugs to market. So we could be next year, subject to what the FDA allows, we'll be in a phase 2. I'm almost certain of that, and that would be the biggest catalyst in our history just by itself. But if that is allowed to be a registration study, that will be enormous, not just for Prescient, but for the sector, because I don't think there's been a drug in oncology in a phase 3 equivalent trial since, well, maybe in about 10 years. So yeah, so it'll be huge, and I think as soon as the market clues onto that, in this risk-off type of environment, well, that's as late stage in development as you get. So that'll be a huge win for Prescient if we can do that.
And what's exciting is orphan drug indication, obviously, not many patients, a reasonable shot at some good pricing for a drug that comes the other way. We're talking a market potentially in the hundreds of billions of dollars for the product, just in T Cell lymphoma indication, plus whatever comes beyond that.
That's right. It isn't orphan diseases, aptly named in some ways because they're often don't get the attention. They're often forgotten in the wake of some of the larger, more prevalent diseases, for example, breast cancer and lung cancer. And as a result, these markets are underserved. So you're talking about, in the case of T Cell lymphomas, there might only be between, depending on the particular disease, 5,000 to 7,000 new cases in the US a year. And the prevalence obviously larger than that. That's the number of people at any one time that have it. It's in the many thousands, but it's not hundreds of thousands. But the prices that some of these drugs are commanding are eye-watering, which that's another conversation as to how ethical that is. But what is undisputed is that there's a big underserved opportunity here, and I think the prize can be quite big for the people able to move the needle in this disease. What's
exciting from a current market perspective is that Prescient is not really capitalizing the opportunity even for PTX100, and here at Prescient Research we've done some research on that to put a valuation around PTX100 in the first instance. But Steve, you've been a pretty hard worker since you took the reins in 2016. There's a whole lot of other stuff following up behind PTX100. Let's say it's 2026, and by that stage, the drug is looking potentially like it'll go live shortly. Should Prescient re-rate, what are you going to be focusing on after that?
That's a very, very good question. So you're talking about in the event of success, what will it look like in
Yes.
a few years' time?
Yeah.
It's a very good question because we would be in that time frame. It's conceivable that the drug will be nearing the finish line, and let's say that all the data falls our way and we get an approval. I think what you're asking is what next for Prescient is,
Right.
are we resting on our oars? What we'd be doing is we're currently in relapsed and refractory T cell lymphoma. I think what we'd be doing is running another study and perhaps in combination with other agents to get earlier in the disease and capture an even bigger market.
Right.
And due to the safety profile of this drug, there's every reason to suggest it would be an excellent combination agent. Now, we're just trying this as a monotherapy first, but as a follow-on, that would be the next thing to do. It would be great to own peripheral T cell lymphomas, to own that space that no one owns. Like
Right.
people own fragments of it. So there'd be that. I think we'd be looking at follow-on compounds to leverage that and extend our IP. Beyond that, there would be we've got obviously our footprint in cell therapy. I'd like to think that Cell Prime is well and truly on the market and probably has a clinical trial, several clinical trials underway, and perhaps even an approval with in combination with another CAR T therapy. And it would be great if Omnicar had some internal and external programs in the clinic.
Right.
So, and who knows what else in the portfolio to really focus on our areas of expertise. But yeah, we could be unrecognizable, and especially that's if all things go right. That's it'd be transformative if any one of them go right. That's still obviously a brilliant win for us.
The trouble for you is starting this journey towards greatness in late 2023. The markets for the last 2 years have been terrible. It's fair to say this has been the worst bear market for small caps generally, and in the life sciences space since about 2002.
Yeah.
So markets have not been kind. It's fair to say that in that sort of environment, stocks roared back quite strongly. I go back to 2003 and the re-rate at that time. That was good for about 4 or 5 years before the GFC came around for life sciences globally and in Australia. And our collective memory stretches back that far. It could be that 2024, you will be much better appreciated.
I think so. Well, certainly we hope so. I mean, the longer the bear market lasts, the quicker, the closer the end is, I guess. And certainly darkest before dawn. But yeah, we've been surprised about how long this malaise has lasted and how deep it's been for the entire sector. Right. And I count my blessings just when I'm licking my wounds, thinking about how tough the markets are. You bump into other Australian and overseas companies who would give their left arm to swap places with us. Because the fact of the matter is, mate, and I'd love your views on this, a lot of companies just won't make it through this. Right. And many, many more that will make it through will be zombies on the other side of this. So we are certainly in a good position with a strong balance sheet, but more to the point, a diversified portfolio. We've been trumpeting that for a while, and it's for a bloody reason. It's just because you get good risk diversification, and when times are tough, you can do responsible things and focus where you need to focus. And that's exactly what we've done. So I think we're in a very, very fortunate position.
Looking at the history of the sector, which we know, we've both seen companies that history has moved past with therapies that might have been good 10 years ago, but other companies have beaten you to the punch. That's not your problem with PTX100. You're right on the money in terms of stuff the market needs right now that you can move quickly. And that's why, it's fair to say you will be one of the survivors. For those of you who are watching this video in 2024, you can go and check. But we're reasonably confident about Steve's future.
Well, I think we've got a fighting chance, that's for sure. I mean, we're not asking for a readout in 10 years' time, and who knows what the landscape looks like now. And that's really any company starting the clinical journey now. That's the ask, right? It's right. Around that time, depending on the disease and the malignancy. But give me a bit of latitude there. But that's roughly the ask. What we're saying here is that we could be in a registration study next year. And even if the FDA won't allow that, it'll be a much, much shorter path because we're in this rare disease. So I really don't see a downside for us. And let's see what we'd just give it a fighting chance. The early data looks good. But if we crack it, my goodness, it's an asymmetrical bet, because we will have hopefully a meaningful piece of a very underserved market.
All right. Well, Steve, hold on to that Prescient stock, because it's a reasonable prediction. It's headed up. Thank you for joining Pittsburgh Research today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, everyone.